quest that began in June has now finally come to an end. Welcome to the final episode of the Egypt saga. Hello everyone, I am Advaith and welcome back to my channel, Subodha. Now, as we come to the end of the Egypt series of episodes, I felt that we should take some time to acknowledge the aim of these series. To start off, I started this series for my own knowledge. I wanted to put myself into the shoes of an Egyptologist, think and learn everything that there is about Egypt. But as time went on, I realized that there was only one aim for all of this all along. It was to tell the people what Egypt truly was. Now, when I say history, people think of dates. In a similar fashion, when I say Egypt, everyone says pyramids. But that was my aim. Proving all of this wrong was my aim. To tell the people that there is so much more that one has to think of when they think of Egypt. And so I hope that I've been able to convey this all throughout this mini series. And so with all of that in mind, let's begin the final episode of the Egypt mini series. So first, let's briefly go over everything that we'll be discussing today. First, we'll be talking about the reunification of Egypt, after which we'll look at the New Kingdom era, then the third intermediate period, and finally the foreign rule and collapse of Egypt. Now let's start. The second intermediate period, as mentioned previously, saw Egypt divided into two. Reunification and war with the Hyksos seemed like the only way out of this period of chaos. Now, keep in mind that even during the Hyksos rule, there was a king. But of course, the king's power was useless. One such king was the king Sekenenra. He decided to take matters into his own hands, and he was a king from the 17th dynasty. He decided that he'll go to war with the Hyksos to liberate Egypt. In an ironic turn of events, he died in battle with the Hyksos, an embarrassing defeat. His son, however, by the name of Kamos, continued his father's cause and partially defeated the Hyksos by destroying their capital, Avaris. Now, I use the word partial because the Hyksos were still not completely defeated. After all, they'd been building so much momentum for the past few decades. But things suddenly changed when Kamos' son, Ahmose I, took charge. Not only did he drive the Hyksos out of Egypt, he drove them all the way up to Jericho. And then he pushed out of Jericho to go into Syria. Now that is commendable. And so began the New Kingdom period of Egyptian history with the 18th dynasty of Ahmose I. He later conquered Upper Egypt as well, ending the Nubian rule. This period in Egypt was extremely well documented. So well documented that I will not be able to list all the achievements of this period. So let me just quickly summarize everything that happened here. So first, let's break this period down into three eras. So the first era we'll be talking about is the rule of the 18th dynasty, which is the age of diplomacy. Next, we'll be talking about the rule of the 19th dynasty, which saw a lot of victories and hence was the age of victory. Then finally, we'll be looking at the 20th dynasty, which was of course back to the age of chaos. Now, I felt all of this was necessary to show you what we're dealing with here. So now, let's get back to the true explanation in the video. The 18th dynasty strengthened diplomacy with its neighbors, reducing the chances of an invasion. During this period, the title of pharaoh came into use instead of king. Hatshepsut, a queen, later became a pharaoh. Extremely rare in history anywhere around the world for a queen to become the head of a country. This period was extremely stable, but this stability was challenged when a king by the name of Amenhotep IV introduced certain chaotic reforms. He first changed his name, going against policy, then brought in a new obscure religion, and then made the worship of all other gods illegal and changed his capital to the obscure city of Amarna. Some weird specific recipes for chaos. But don't worry, nothing went wrong this time because everything was restored back to normal once his children took charge. Now, after the 18th dynasty came, of course, the 19th dynasty started by the king Ramses I. But his son Ramses II is probably the greatest pharaoh in Egyptian history. Let's see why. Let me give you a few achievements of Ramses II for you to understand how legendary and how great he was for Egypt. For starters, he signed the first ever peace treaty in history with the mighty Hittite Empire. Second, he brought back the architectural golden age of Egypt by rebuilding a lot of architectural monuments. And finally, he saved Egypt from its greatest ever invasion. And perhaps we should all be thankful to him for the entire history of Egypt. It was in the Battle of Kadesh that he saved Egypt from this invasion. It was fought on river banks and used extremely new technology for the period. Perhaps the greatest historical battle ever. When he died, all of Egypt went into a sudden state of mourning as the man was loved by everyone. And so there was once again sudden chaos. Let's see how. After a long and glorious rule of the 19th dynasty came the 20th dynasty. This dynasty was extremely short-lived. Its last king was ironically also named Ramses, this time Ramses the 11th. He was a weak king by all means. He had completely abandoned all of his capitals in Lower Egypt and suddenly moved to Upper Egypt. This caused the priests in Lower Egypt to take complete power, just as they did during the first intermediate period. And with that began the third intermediate period. This period, however, is largely different from the first two intermediate periods. It was the ultimate decline of Egypt as no other golden era succeeded this period. This period was pure administrative chaos. It started with Ramses the 11th. During his time, the Libyans invaded all of Egypt, completely conquering it. Here, they established complete control for the next 5 decades or so, or even more than that. After this came a dynasty called the Leantopolis, which again invaded all of Egypt, pushing out the Libyans. And after this were a series of complete invasions from various dynasties. The 25th dynasty, however, saw some of the worst conquests. A conquest led by a kingdom called the Assyrian Kingdom. They began the conquest of Egypt and took complete control of it. And so it ended. The long and fantastic history of Egypt finally came to an end. Now, after this third intermediate period was a period called the Late Period, which was a continuation of the third intermediate period. This period saw the invasion of many important forces which conquered Egypt for its entire future. It all started with the Greeks, the Romans, the Phoenicians, and the most important of all, Alexander the Great. After the conquest of Egypt by Alexander the Great, the Ptolemaic dynasty began ruling Egypt. It was a Greek dynasty. During this period, the Greeks merged their own culture into that of Egypt. This was when Greek became an accepted language in Egypt. The merger of Egyptian hieroglyphic and Greek became a language known as Coptic, as we saw on the Rosetta Stone. Now, this new Ptolemaic dynasty was kind of like a wolf in a sheep's clothing. I'll explain why I say that. They all loved pretending like pharaohs, supporting the Egyptian way of life, religion and cults, all while establishing their own strong presence and power in Egypt. A clever tactic
by all means.
The Romans took charge after the Greeks, after invading them, of course. But the Romans were a lot more hostile than the Greeks. They neither accepted Egyptian culture, cults, nor religion. Instead, they were tyrannical. First, they forced them to convert their religion, forced them to abandon all their temples, and converted them into office barracks. And most important of all, destroyed the culture of hieroglyphic writing.
With all of this happening, the idea of a pure ancient Egypt came to an end. Their culture took a devastating hit during this third intermediate period. It was completely destroyed, burned to the ground with the invasion of the Greeks and especially the Romans. No signs of hieroglyphics, Egyptian religion, or writing sustained the wrath of these empires.
Now, finally, we're done with the entire history of ancient Egypt. Would you believe that? Think of where we all started. And this is where we are. So, I hope that at the end of this series, you've understood the true aim as to why I started this, to teach you that Egypt is more than just pyramids. And with that in mind, let's take a look at today's takeaways.
Today, first we looked at the rise of the 18th dynasty and how the New Kingdom era began. After this, we looked at the several achievements of the 18th and 19th dynasties, especially those of Ramses II. Next, we looked at the chaos of the 20th dynasty, after which we saw the rise of the third intermediate period. Then we saw complete chaos and the rule of the Assyrian Empire, followed by the Greek Empire, and finally the Romans. And this saw the subsequent decline of Egyptian greatness. And so, that's it for the Egypt saga, and I'll see you in the next episode where we talk about my country, India, and its Indus Valley civilization. If you enjoyed the video, then please make sure to like the video, and if you know someone who's interested in topics like these, then please make sure to share it as well. If you're new to the channel, then please make sure that you're subscribed and that you click the bell icon, and I'll see you in the next one.